Today we're going to be looking at the Sunjata story, and we're going to be using the terms definition sheet as well as this sheet for the required sources. We're going to go back to day one where we studied the term interdisciplinary, because today's focus is primarily going to be about art, a little bit of history, and the whole point of interdisciplinary is that you're bringing in different subject matters, different disciplines, to get a full perspective of what the historic narrative happens to be. The themes that we're going to be looking at primarily are going to be this one here, creativity, a little bit of resistance, as well as the migration and African diaspora. The first source we're looking at is going to be the Sunjata story. We're going to click this link and watch this particular video. And this excerpt is from the AP framework. And what they're talking about here is Sunjata Keita, the founder of the Mali Empire, who is also related to Mansa Musa, who was his nephew. And you'll see how Sunjata Keita's work is going to lay the foundation for a prosperous Mali Empire. Little background information, we're primarily looking at Sunjata Keita's Mali Empire. Later we'll talk about Mansa Musa. This term right here is king. And one of the other items of concern is that in the 13th century, the Mali Empire did have the Mandan Charter. And what's significant about this charter is that it contradicts this argument that Africa was a dark continent and did not hit any of the requirements for a empire according to European standards. One of the things they were concerned about with regard to this charter was creating human rights for its citizens, which definitely happens to be something that's not happening up until the European Enlightenment. On the guide sheet, we want to be able to define these terms and treat them like definitions. Here you can check your answer. The Mali Empire, griots, storytelling, how history was transferred from one generation to another, as well as the role of musical instruments for West Africa, and the story of how Sunjata Keita winds up gaining control of the Mali Empire. Just a side note question here, how will slavery impact such storytelling and cultural aspects of Africans? This is something that we're going to come back to. On this image, we have a required AP source, and the required AP source is basically this map that was made from a cartographer from Spain. If Spain is starting to create maps about this African empire, they're going to have some motivation, and the motivation is going to be the wealth of the Mali Empire. As we mentioned before, Mansa Musa is definitely going to rule the Mali Empire at a time of heightened wealth. And that's the whole point of this particular map, that it represents European interest in this particular African empire. Another required source is this image of a griot. As it mentions here, the playing the role of the historian storyteller, and we also have both genders playing this particular role of storyteller. And we have another required image, and the significance here is the creation of art, which is indication of high civilization. And we also have a military looking figure, which means that Mali Empire had a military, they have a central leadership, and they also are creating art, three prerequisites for establishing an empire. For source 2, we're going to be looking at this particular video, but we're only looking at this 4-minute section, and the 4-minute section is significant because we're going to see African influence in Cuban music. The questions for this particular source: why do you think the AP framework added this? And where did Africans go after leaving Africa during the transatlantic slave trade? This image answers the prior two questions. The exodus of Africans going to Central America, in this case Cuba. They're not only going to North America and South America. They're going to all three. And as they go, they're going to be bringing potentially their culture, their belief systems, their way of life, maybe their religion, which is the whole point of this particular theme. So for source 2, what we're looking at is the instruments being used to show that African influence. We're going to transition to a possible odd connection. First thing we're going to do is Google search griots in hip hop to figure out whether or not you agree or disagree with the comparison. This particular link will take you to this source. Here is a screenshot. It's giving you some more information about the griot tradition. As it mentions here, spiritual guidance and knowledge. It also says that you have to be born into for this particular family. Continuing with the article, for this task, I want you to identify key terms in the text below using any of the information from the course. For example, we see a reference to Egypt, one of the civilizations we've looked at, one of the AP framework themes. So as you read through, identify some of the key terms from this course. We're also going to do that with this particular portion of the reading. And we're going to focus now on this section here because they bring up the last poets. And the article is comparing griots to rap music. And I don't think you could talk about rap music without talking about the last poets. Here we're going to analyze their particular song to see if this particular argument holds up. The song here is Understand What Black Is. So we're doing the same thing. We're going to identify some of the key terms. As they mention here, they're bringing up the issue of race as a color. We've looked at the term ethnicity as well as race in this course. And then we're going to continue looking at the remaining portion of this song. At the end of this particular lesson, you want to be able to define these terms. Hopefully you have this filled out. And the last thing that we're going to do for fun is to search Lion King and Sunjata story to see what comes up. Here we have an excerpt from an article in the Washington Post. And if you want to check your definitions, feel free to use these last two slides.